My mom was in a nursing home after suffering a severe stroke. She had been there for 3 years at this point and was beginning her dying process. I came to see her one afternoon, and she looked exhausted. I asked her what was up and why she hadn't slept last night. She told me she couldn't sleep because the bald man from downstairs kept waking her up every time he came to her room. She said he was chatty and liked to tell her about things that had happened in his life. She'd remind him that it was dark o'clock and asked if he could maybe visit during the day when she was awake. But he kept coming back, every 30 to 40 minutes or so. I played 20 questions with her because I was concerned it was an employee, and maybe there were some red flags I needed to heed or conversations I needed to have with staff. She said he was a patient. His name was Alex. That seemed weird to me because who lets patients wander freely throughout the night without stopping them from entering someone else's room? I went to get lunch and decided to go downstairs to see about gently speaking to Alex about pestering my mom. I found Alex. He was also at the end of his life process, but much further along than my mom. He hadn't been able to walk for several years. His family was gathered around outside his room, crying and wringing their hands. The hospital had called to say he wasn't long for this world and to come say goodbye. But no one was in his room. They were all in the hall. It seemed like they were afraid to be near him, so I chatted with a couple of them and asked if they would like me to go in there with them so they could say goodbye. They said yes, so I went in first, and they followed me. I facilitated conversation and showed them how to say goodbye. It was actually nice to be able to do that for someone. I asked them to say out loud what Alex meant to them, how and why they loved him. Once they got started, they were on a roll, with some actual laughter, and were totally cool with me leaving, which I did. I grabbed lunch and took it back to my mom's room to share with her. When I walked in, she said, "Well, that was nice of you to do." Unsure of what she meant, I asked her. She said Alex came to say goodbye and thank me. He'd seen me many times in my mom's room while walking the hallway. I thought my mom meant that a staff member told her about it, but she insisted it was Alex, not a staff member. Insisted to the point of being pissy about it. So I asked the staff when I left, who told her I went downstairs and helped that family say goodbye. No one knew what I was talking about. No one knew I was downstairs because they only worked on their assigned floor. That's a cool, weird hospital story that is 109% true. Dying people are open to seeing more than the rest of us. Many other interesting things happened, but this story stands out for me. I worked at a very nice nursing home for a while as a med tech CNA while I was in school. I worked on the memory care unit where the residents were genuinely well cared for, happy, and surrounded by clean facilities. The whole 9 yards. One of the residents, Mr. B, had been there since opening day and was very particular, liking things his way. He had his designated seat in the dining room, received exactly 3 scoops of strawberry ice cream after dinner, and sat in his chair by his window until exactly 11:30. Just a grumpy little cutie pie. Well, he inevitably passed away, and a new resident moved in less than a week later, bringing her own belongings. However, her bed and armchair were in the same place as Mr. B's. On her first night, I did my rounds and was doing my usual tasks after residents were in bed, washing compression hose or something, when the new resident came down the hall and said, "There's a man in my room telling me to get out." We had a resident who would sometimes wander, so I assumed it was him and accompanied her to her room to return him to bed. However, her room was empty. Assuming she might have still been confused, I tucked her back in and went to find the wanderer. But no one was up, and the wanderer was asleep in bed. I thought maybe she had just dreamed it. About 20 minutes later, she came to me again, saying, "He said to get out, that I'm in his room." I walked her back to her room again, but there was still no one there. This time, she pointed to her armchair and said, "He told me to move my chair and put his back, and to get out of his room." At that point, my brain put 2 and 2 together. I ended up letting her sit with me at the nurse's station until the 3rd shift staff arrived. When the 3rd shift CNA got there, she complained about the new resident being up. I explained what had happened, but she rolled her eyes, saying, "Come on," and stormed off down the hallway, muttering under her breath about my incompetence. She marched into the new residence room and said, "Mr. B, you are dead. This is not your room anymore. Go on and let this poor woman sleep." The resident went to bed, and I went home. After that night, there were no more complaints of nighttime visitors from that resident. I felt kind of bad, but I didn't know how to exorcise ghosts. They didn't cover that in medtech class. As a nurse in the psychiatric ward of Oakwood Hospital, I'd grown accustomed to the unpredictable nature of our patients. But nothing could have prepared me for the eerie events that unfolded during my night shifts. At first, it was small things: a missing clipboard, a misplaced medication cart, or an unlocked supply cabinet. I attributed these incidents to staff oversight or patient mischief. However, the frequency and peculiarity of these events began to unsettle me. Patients would occasionally report seeing a strange man lurking in the shadows, but I dismissed their claims as paranoid delusions or hallucinations. After all, many of our patients struggled with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or severe anxiety. One patient, Emily, persisted in telling me about the tall, dark-haired man who would enter her room at night. I listened attentionally, nodding and taking notes, but deep down, I doubted her story. That was until the night of October 12th. As I began my 11 p.m. rounds, the ward was unusually quiet. The patients were mostly asleep, and the only sound was the soft hum of the hospital's ventilation system. I entered room 317 to check on Emily, who was awake and staring intently at the corner of her room. As I approached her bed, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the bathroom door. Tall, dark-haired, and wearing a long coat, he seemed to blend into the darkness. His back was to me, and he appeared to be watching Emily. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, unsure of what to do. The man didn't seem to notice me. He remained motionless, his attention fixed on Emily. I slowly backed away, trying not to make a sound. I slipped out of the room, my mind racing. I hurried to the nurse's station, grabbed the phone, and dialed security. "Code purple," I whispered urgently. "Intruder on the psych ward." Within minutes, hospital security and local police arrived, swarming the ward. They searched every room, but the mysterious man was nowhere to be found. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd underestimated our patient's claims. Emily's words echoed in my mind. "The man is here." The police investigation yielded nothing conclusive, but I knew what I saw. The experience left me questioning my own perception of reality and the unseen forces that might be at work in our hospital. From that night on, I listened more intently to our patients' stories, and the missing items and strange occurrences took on a new significance. The psychiatric ward, once a place of concrete explanations, had become a realm of uncertainty. I work the graveyard shift as a security guard for a hospital, and do I have some stories to tell? First, let me fill you in on the general layout of the campus. The main building is divided into two parts. The first part consists of a ground-level emergency department, an operating room on the first floor, and a childbirthing center on the second floor, and the second part holds the patient units. There are 7 floors here, and each wing is used by various patient classes: cardiac, behavioral, pediatric, etc. Apart from the main building is the McHam Building, which is a historic structure that used to serve as a nursing school back in the late 1800s. It was a rectangular square building that was used partially for classes, partially for dormitories. Presently, it is used as an office space for handling management needs and things of the sort. It is only open during the day, unlike the rest of the hospital, which operates 24/7. My main duty as a security guard is to handle disorderly patients, who are usually having psychotic breakdowns or high on drugs, and to patrol the premises and make sure nothing is out of the ordinary. The exterior of the campus can get a little creepy at night, and my eyes are always peeled for wild animals, especially coyotes. Truth be told, I'd rather spend my entire shift outside with the coyotes than spend 5 minutes inside Macomb. I have to check it at least once a night, and I always make sure to bring my coworker with me. We hurriedly scan the building's 4 floors and move on without a second glance. We both agree that the place gives us the creeps. The hospital staff like to chatter about how hospitals are haunted places. It's reasonable. There's at least 1 death per day at the hospital I work at. This presumption, coupled with a tired mind, can give one the impression of spotting a ghost as it makes its journey to the other side. I've never seen anything remotely paranormal during my shift, let alone my life. My coworker swears he's seen unexplained shadows move out of the corners of his eyes. Our perspectives changed the night we decided to play the stupidest game ever. I was sitting in my office with my coworker Frank shooting the shit. Our office was located just outside the emergency department, where we directed lost family members to the rooms of their respective relatives. On this particular night, a mutual buddy of ours, Mark, popped his head in. Mark was obsessed with ghosts, and the topic inevitably made its way into our conversation. "You guys ever see anything when you go through McHam?" he began. We both shook our heads. "You know that's the most haunted place, right?" I rolled my eyes. "Mark, not this again." "It's true. You know that it used to be a nursing school? Well, apparently, it was a wicked tough one. Exams were brutal. They were so brutal that nursing students began to kill themselves because they were afraid of failing out." "That's dumb," I said. "There was this one group of nursing students. It was around 1910. I can't remember the exact year, but they were so scared of failing their exam that they made a suicide pact. They all jumped from the roof and killed themselves right in front of the entrance." I looked at him, dumbfounded. "Seriously? That's a load of crap?" Mark regarded me with wide eyes. "You don't believe me?" "Not one bit." "Do you know the glass cabinet with the creepy dolls? On the ground floor?" I knew exactly what he was talking about. Near the main entrance, there's a glass cabinet that displays 5 homemade dolls that are dressed up as nurses. They stood 14 inches tall and wore those old-school nursing outfits you know with the red crosses. I never gave them further inspection because there was something unsettling about them. There have been problems of hooligans stealing them in the past, but never on my watch. They were indeed creepy, watching me as I did my rounds through McHam. Well, they say that the souls of those nurses became trapped in the dolls. 5 students, 5 dolls. They say that if you go to the 3rd floor, stand outside room 333, and knock on it 3 times so the 3rd strike lands just as the clock turns 3:33, the dolls will play hide and seek with you. I laughed out loud at this. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I looked over at Frank, who was also silent. "Come on, Frank. You can't actually be buying this?" "I heard about it too," Frank mumbled. I don't know how the two of them convinced me to try out this foolish experiment. It was obviously a ghost story fabricated by some bored staff member who wanted to get a rise out of his coworkers. But before I knew it, I was standing outside of room 333 in the McHam building with Frank and Mark. It was 3:32 in the morning and I felt like a fool. "Well, here goes nothing," I said as I rapped on the wooden door 3 times. The sound echoed through the dark hallway and faded away. I checked my watch. It was 3:33. We waited in silence for a few moments. I braced myself for something, but nothing came. "Come on, let's go." I heard a door close downstairs and I nearly jumped out my skin. I looked at the other 2, who were equally as shaken. I grabbed Mark firmly by the shoulders. "Are you fucking with us?" I hissed. "Is someone pulling a prank on us?" Mark violently shook his head. I could see the terror in his eyes as my flashlight illuminated his face. "We need to check it out. Could be a trespasser." "I hope." We slowly descended to the 1st floor. As we came into the hallway, I wondered how frightened we looked. I led the way with Frank close behind me, while Mark was literally glued to his ass. We probably resembled some demented version of the Mystery Gang. I flashed my light on all the doors. None were open. My light came to the cabinet and my heart leapt into my throat. Yup, they were gone. "We're fucked now, boys," Mark said softly and crossed himself. I turned to him. "Mark, I swear to God, if you are pulling a fast one on us, I'll throw you off the roof myself." When I said these words, a chill swept through me. The temperature must have suddenly dropped 10 degrees, and I shivered. The air itself almost felt depressed. A whisper drifted through my ear. It started. "We have to find them, or something bad will happen." It was Frank. "Can't you feel it? The negative energy?" I could. I motioned toward the nearest door. "Come on," I said. We crept around the first floor, opening each door with great anticipation, not knowing what was in store for us. To my relief, the floor was empty. There was still no sign of the dolls. We gathered in the hallway and were about to make our way up to the second floor when we heard a slight patter above us. It sounded like 3 or 4 children were running around overhead. Pit, pat down the hallway toward us. A pause, then pit, pat in the opposite direction. This happened 3 times. Then it stopped. "Shit," I thought to myself. "Oh, fuck that." Mark whimpered and turned toward the door. My hand shot out and found his elbow. "Don't be a pussy, we're in this together." I could see Mark's face glistening with sweat and his eyes wide with terror. We climbed the stairway with great caution. We clung to each other in fear, savoring each breath as if it were our last. When we came to the hallway, we were greeted by the slight tinkling of bells. The source was coming from the far end of the hallway. I shone my light into the darkness. Nothing. The faint tinkle warmly greeted us. I wanted to turn and run, but something was drawing me in. I slowly led the group toward the sound. I reached one of the doors and stopped. I motioned to my ear and pointed beyond the door. The other 2 nodded. I gripped the doorknob and slowly let myself in. On the other side of the door was a bathroom. It was one of those old dormitory bathrooms with a rounded sink in the middle and undivided latrines on both sides. In the porcelain sink were 3 dolls. I cautiously approached them and slowly extended my hand, as if the merest touch would set my hand on fire. I picked one up. It wore a white nurse's dress with a red cross on the right breast. On its head was a white cap with another red cross. Its black hair fell over its face, covering the features. I swept its hair back to reveal a faded, smiling face. Its porcelain skin was icy cool to the touch. I shuddered. We each returned a doll to the cabinet. 2 to go, I told myself. Mark and Frank were silent, exhausted from the terror of the night. I was relieved that they were with me. If I had to do this by myself, I think I'd have lost my mind. "Do you think we ought to split up?" whispered Frank. "Cover more ground that way?" I wheeled around and faced him. "No." "Don't you watch horror movies? No matter what happens, we cannot split up. If the entity is malevolent, it'll kill us when we're alone. If anything, we should tie a rope around us so we don't get separated." My logic trumped their fearful state. Besides, I felt much better with Frank and Mark close by. Glued at the hip, we went to the 3rd floor and inspected it thoroughly. We couldn't find any dolls, and I kept my ears pricked for any noises. When the 3rd floor seemed safe, we climbed to the 4th floor. While in the stairwell, the sound of running footsteps greeted us. We must be getting close to another one. As we stepped into the hallway, the footsteps faded, and we watched a door slam shut, making all 3 of us jump in unison. What came next made my balls crawl up into my body. You know that cheesy child's laugh in Roller Coaster Tycoon? The one you hear over and over again, which makes you want to punch that kid in the face? Well, hearing that same laugh now filled me not with frustration, but terror. Uncensored terror. To my left, Mark was praying. Frank remained as stoic as ever. Together, we inched our way toward the door that had closed moments before. I braced myself and opened it, expecting the worst. Nothing came, and I looked inside. The room was empty, save for a ladder that disappeared into a hole in the ceiling. The night sky greeted us. Of course, they would hide on the roof. After a quick game of rock, paper, scissors, Frank climbed the ladder first, with me close behind. We stepped onto a small stone patio. From the roof of the McCam building, the main part of the hospital looked inviting. I caught myself wishing that I was in my office and not playing this stupid game. Look there. Frank pointed to a small figure in the corner of the patio. The doll was propped up against the stone railing that overlooked the main entrance. I picked the doll up and looked over the railing. It didn't look so high from here. I wondered if I leapt from here, I'd survive. I grasped the railing and began to hoist myself up when Frank called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" I froze. What the hell was I doing? A spell of vertigo gripped me as I backed away from the railing. Did I seriously just consider jumping off? I shook it off. "Come on," I said sullenly. "Let's go find that last doll." We searched McCam for what seemed like hours. We thoroughly swept through the 4 floors twice without any luck. I was starting to feel more irritated than annoyed. The strangest part was that there were no more weird noises. I started to question if there were only 4 dolls to begin with. If there was a 5th doll, we would have had to start tearing up the floorboards to find it. Our search for the 5th doll came to an anticlimactic conclusion when the sun's rays made their way into the hallway, filling it with a lavender glow. A wave of relief rushed through me, but in the back of my mind, I still regretted that we never found that last doll, if it ever existed. Things started to get weird since we played that game. Every morning around 3:33, I hear the pit-patter of small feet run by my office, or if I'm on patrol, I hear a child giggling. These things always last a couple of moments, but it always scares me when it happens, even though I expect it. I have returned to McCom since that night, but there are only 4 dolls on display behind the glass. I could have sworn there were 5.